we're doing the oral military history of Louis Dudeck, June 1st, 2007 at the Lowell Area Historical Museum. He lives at 3081 Kissing Rock Drive in Lowell. He was born September 3rd, 1943. Doing the interview is Ethan Drain. The camera people are Ashley Naraki and Jeanette Greiner. He served in Vietnam as a machine gunner, and after Vietnam, he was a teacher.
Am I ready?
You ready?
Hi, I'm Louis Dudeck. I was just telling these guys a moment ago. I was born in 1943. I'm 63 years old, and I went in the Marine Corps in 1963. So, a lot of threes and a lot of age there. Okay.
Thanks for sitting down with us.
No problem. Okay, you gonna ask me questions?
Yeah. No, actually, I'm just gonna kind of guide you throughout, but
okay,
it's kind of open. Just start with your youth, through your high school years, where you grew up. Anything about that?
Okay. Well, if as far as high school, if there's anything you don't want to do, is follow my example in high school, because I wasn't the best student. Let's say sports and just having a good time were paramount to me, and I was one of these guys, kind of like my son. I didn't crack books very much, but I did okay on exams, so I'd wind up getting a good mark on an exam, and I would have it all taken away because I never did the homework. So not a good example to follow, but I seem to have made it, and so that's okay. My son did much the same thing as me, and I used to take off the belt to him when I was young, and he wouldn't do his homework. Today he's a scientist out at Los Alamos National Lab in New Mexico. So teachers, watch that, even the ones that don't do the homework can make it. Okay, so that's high school. I got out of high school and I graduated in 1962 with not the best grades. And then I hung around my hometown of Bloomer, Wisconsin. That's where I was raised until I was about 19. And then I wanted to do something a little more exciting than running around and operating a little pool hall that I had there. So I joined the Marine Corps in 1963. Went to California, did my basic training, or we call it basic training, it's good, boot camp. And San Diego, and they called us Hollywood Marines out there because we were pretty close to that area. We went to boot camp there, and I recall just after finishing boot camp, when I was going to advanced infantry training, is when President Kennedy was killed.
All right.
And so it was kind of spooky, because all of a sudden, one morning, couldn't have been, I don't know, it was real early, and people were banging on everything, and I could hear truck engines and just noise that we normally didn't expect. And some officers come running through, pack your gear, we're going to issue cards for drawing ammunition and all that kind of thing, because they thought something terrible was going to happen regarding Russia and all of those kinds of things because of Kennedy being assassinated. Luckily, that died down within a very short time, and we went about our normal training. And I was in California for approximately 2.5 years. And in that time, we did a lot of mountain training. We trained on amphibious vehicles, rubber boats in the surf. The water is so cold out there, you can't believe it.
It's cold?
Oh, God.
Right.
Along the California shoreline, comes right down out of Alaska.
Oh,
so it's very, very cold. The water never gets over maybe 50, 55 degrees. So they would keep us out there in the water for hours. And then come in and roll around in the sand. So beaches are beautiful. Water is freezing. That's why most of the time when you see beaches in California, everybody's up on the beach. Nobody's in the water. So but it was great. Loved it out there. So training was pretty rough. We never had any particular wars in mind. We were just kind of waiting around for any war to come along, and that's kind of what Marines do. We're kind of what I guess you would call the shock troops, assault troops, or whatever. So,
did you guys know that issues in Vietnam were going on?
Not
Or
at
that there was
that time,
tension?
really. Vietnam, none of us ever heard anything about that. Even though that did get started during the Kennedy administration, prior to, obviously, before he was assassinated. But it just wasn't an issue. So when we finally did get involved there and they determined that we were going to send a bunch of Marines over, we had done all the wrong kind of training for that, because we were in the mountains, we were in the desert. Did a lot of training on tracked vehicles and assault landings of beaches. It's kind of funny because whenever we were going to go aboard ship and do one of these assault on a beach in California, all the people would come down. They would picnic, to bring their kids, and watch these crazies get in boats, get online, and come storming ashore on the beach. It was, I guess, a pretty good show for them.
All around the train.
Go strut around afterwards. We got leave, and then we could go into town, and the girls really loved that.
When did you finish up?
We better not get into that part. But, okay, where am I now? 2.5 years in California. You want me to go right into heading over to Hawaii and Okinawa and that kind of thing, and then before Vietnam?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. We took a ship out of San Diego. We had over 1,000 men on this. It's a full battalion. That's roughly what a battalion is. A reinforced battalion is 1,000 men. And out of San Diego, we ran into rough weather. I mean, it was, when I say rough, like 30-foot waves, almost the whole way. And can you picture about 900 of these 1,000 guys
Even over the
even there? You know, most of them never made it to the rail. Yeah, the decks and it was not a very pretty thing. But I didn't get sick, but most everybody did. But anyway, we made it to Hawaii, where we took on provisions and that kind of thing. And we got off the ship for about 24 hours, and I wound up spending every nickel I had in my pocket. Which wasn't a great deal, but we had a good time, and everybody got on board. Probably not the best of shape. We knew where we were going. So from then, it was another 10-day trip to Okinawa on board ship. And there's not a whole lot to do. We would do PT, physical training, exercises, and that kind of thing, hours and hours and hours on end. And then when we got bored, we'd had boxing matches with the Navy. We affectionately called them squids, but I have lots of friends in the Navy, so we kind of harass each other about that. But anyway, we would do these, they called smokers. So we'd do boxing matches, and I think that's why today I have to go to the doctor. He's going to try to straighten my nose, because I think in one of those, I always was a great hitter, but I always hit people in the fist with my face.
So you were involved in the matches?
Oh, I was from time to time, but I can't see a thing without my glasses, so it's just a matter of seeing how many times they could hit me before they got tired. So, no, I don't think a Marine ever lost a match aboard ship. That I can ever remember. But it was what we did. So anyway, we got to Okinawa, and we went into jungle training there, and we did all kinds of things that we never had an opportunity to do in California, like play with the snakes and the lizards and the things in the jungle, which I really don't like. We did a lot of free rock climbing, rappelling down cliffs, everything, we try to be silent. And we had one occasion we were going down this 100-foot cliff. I mean, it's straight rock wall, straight down. And the thing was, if we're making a night assault or something and we're going up these cliffs, you free climb the cliffs. In the process of coming off, we had to simulate that we were taking our wounded down with us. So the only way you do that is a guy gets on your back and you go down and try to rappel down these cliffs. And one guy, he took the silence so seriously that he lost his hold on the rope and he went down. He never made a sound. The only thing you heard is the clatter of his rifle when it hit the side of the cliff on the way down. And he really didn't get hurt bad, so.
Fell the whole way.
He went the whole way.
Oh, wow.
Never said a word. Never yelled, nothing. So. But it was fun. They would drop us out, a couple miles out in the ocean. We would, we'd go out on rubber boats. We'd do rubber boat training. The surf is very heavy there. So 8 of us would get on a rubber boat. You didn't ride in the boat, you rode on the tubes.
That were connected from
and you straddled those, so one foot's in the water and the other's in the boat, and you paddled, and your gear was on the inside. It was more important that the gear stayed dry, your ammunition, rifle, and so on, than it was used. We would go out a couple of miles, and on a signal, we would all drop off, and somebody, a Navy seaman or something, would take charge of the rubber boats, and then we would swim back in. And we did that in daytime and at night, and it was kind of, you better know how to swim pretty good. I can't remember, I think the first time we did that, they gave us life jackets to wear. The second time, there was no life jackets.
Just you and a couple miles away.
Yeah, but that time I remember was in daylight. You could look down, and the water was just crystal clear, and it was only maybe 20, 30 feet deep, and I saw sea snakes. You know what a sea snake is? It's one of the most deadly creatures on the face of the earth. And we had sea snakes. There were dozens of them. They have very tiny head. The body may be about 6, 7, 8 feet long, but the head is no bigger than my thumb. So they can't grab anything, but they get fish and so on. And you look down in the water, and they're swimming right down with you, about 3 or 4 feet below the surface. You talk about an incentive to get on dry land. That was it. So we trained in Okinawa for a couple months maybe, and got back on ships again. And now we were going to Vietnam. And I don't remember exactly how long it took us to get there. A few days, maybe 3, 4 days. And so we were all excited and we're all nervous because we now have our Geneva Convention cards, which says that if you're a POW, you have to abide by certain rules, and so does the enemy, and so on. Of course, nobody told them that. They just told us. So, we're all nervous. And we get to the point where you can see the hazy line of the coast of Vietnam in the distance. And say, whoa, here we go. This is the real thing. And early one morning, it comes over the loudspeakers aboard ships. Marines, man your battle stations. So we got up on the deck, and they sent us down these landing nets on the side of ships, and the ships are, they're bobbing in the ocean, and the landing net's a pretty dangerous thing to go down. But we got in these landing boats, and we're maybe 2, 3 miles offshore, and it took us hours to get everybody in the boats, and then finally, at some point, some given signal, all the boats get online. And they gun the engines, and we go racing for the shore. And we got to a point maybe quarter of a mile from the shore, and it's lock and load. You know, your platoon sergeant, lock and load. That means you put a round in the chamber, and we're getting ready to rock and roll. So now we are nervous, and some of the guys are sick for bobbing around for hours in these little boats, so they're tossing their cookies, and I just want to get off. So, scared to death, all of a sudden the ramps drop, and we go screaming and yelling and running up the beach, and make it up maybe 30, 40 yards, and hit the sand, you know, looking for something. And what do we have? We got dozens of little old ladies out there with little coolers selling beer and pop on the beach, and reporters and TV cameras watching. It was nothing. It was just staged for the press. And of course, the Vietnamese knew we were coming ashore long before we did. They knew everything we did long before we did it. So I think they had more people inside our own establishment, let's say, military establishment, than we did. So that was our big landing in Vietnam, and that was right around the Da Nang area. And we moved inland from that. We walked. We never rode anywhere. We either took choppers or we walked. And we walked to the Da Nang Air Base. And we took up positions around it. It's a huge, huge air base. And so our battalion of roughly 1,000 guys, we didn't cover maybe 1/10 of it in terms of setting up a perimeter, a defensive perimeter around the base. So we stayed there for, I don't know, a couple of weeks. I don't think I heard a shot fired in anger for at least 2 weeks. Every once in a while, one of our guys would get jumpy and start cranking off rounds at something, who knows what. And in fact, maybe there were some probes, but the Vietnamese, the VC, were very good at getting in and looking at things without being seen. We learned that later, the hard way. You can stop me and ask me anything you want to.
That's okay. When did you start to see actually heavy fire or major combat, or start to get involved with it yourself?
I'd have been perfectly happy if everything would have stayed just like it was at Da Nang the first time, but it didn't. We got orders to go somewhere, and I wish I could remember the names of the little towns and so on, but the only, I can just remember vague things that probably, it would make sense to people who were there, like Chu Lai, the Chu Lai Peninsula, Marble Mountain, Monkey Mountain, the A Shaw Valley, Khe Sanh, some of those names I know you've heard. But I was in a lot of those places, and in each of those places, it had its own little atmosphere. I mean, it was always dangerous. There was always something going on. But let's take Chu Lai, for example. When we were there, it's a huge sandy area. It's like 50, 60, 100 square miles of nothing but snow-white sand and clumps of bamboo growing out of that. When I say clumps, it may be acre, 2 acres, that kind of thing. And it's just snow-white sand made up of seashells and so on. And the temperature is extremely hot. It's very hot and humid all the time. And we would patrol that area. We had a major battle going through there. I wasn't involved in that. I didn't get into Chu Lai until after that, pretty much. But we were sent in to clean up little pockets of resistance, VC, that were still there. It was a Viet Cong stronghold before we got there. And these guys, every once in a while, somebody would take a few shots at us from the bamboo thickets, and we'd have to hit the sand to figure out where the fire was coming from. And the above ground temperature is probably 105, but you get down in that sand, it's 130 degrees or more. And of course, we're all wearing our stateside utilities, which are heavy cotton uniforms. There's no such thing as jungle uniforms, which are very light and airy. So at that time, we took a lot of heat-related casualties as a result of it. Not too much by gunfire, but these guys knew what they were doing. How they would get us down on the sand, and it wouldn't take very many shots before you figured out, when you see dirt popping up beside you, that you want to hit the dirt, whether you want to go down 130 degrees or stand there and let them shoot you. So, not very many casualties due to gunfire, but a lot of heat-related injuries there, and some evacuations, but we eventually cleared that. We didn't take too many casualties, and we didn't inflict too many casualties, but we pushed the BC out of the Chulai Peninsula and went on to bigger and better things down in the Shaw Valley, which was a real hotbed. That place was just, when I say valley, it's mountains, it's rivers, it's swamp. Just about the worst thing that you could ever imagine. It's absolutely beautiful country, but in terms of trying to live there and fight there, it was just a nightmare because they could hit you from just about anywhere at any time. And we had some really crazy rules and restrictions that we had to live by. Because for some reason, President Johnson, who was in office at that time, and the Defense Secretary McNamara, figured that if we want to put on a good, strong show of force, but we don't want to be too mean to anybody. So one of the little rules that we had to work with was you don't fire unless you're fired upon. And when you're in jungle, I can see maybe from me to you if it's if we got a clear zone, because the trails, which we didn't walk on trails, we tried to stay off the trails because they always booby-trapped the trails. And so we'd stay off as far as we could and still be able to see the trail so we know where it went. But in that kind of a situation, you're just as likely to meet somebody coming at you as not, or have an ambush set up to get you. And the rule of thumb in the bush is the first guy who shoots lives. And so we didn't pay real close attention to the rules of engagement when we'd leave the wire, which means when we left wherever we were, to go in the bush and do patrols or something. But one of the sergeants from headquarters would be there, and he'd check the chamber of everybody's rifle and machine gun and so on. When we go out and we get 20 yards beyond him, and it was lock and load, brother. And we were, like I said, I was in machine guns, or like you said, I was a machine gunner. And they always loved to have guns along on these patrols because we were the firepower. We were the heavy weapons. And most everybody was armed with M14s, which is a .308 caliber rifle, which is a good heavy round. But it only has a 20-round magazine. Now my M60, it's a 23-pound gun, and I used to carry 600 rounds of ammunition for that. So I'm packing maybe 60, 70 pounds just with that, without getting to my other gear, my canteens, my food. I carried a .45 pistol at that time. Whenever something got really bad, when we got hit on patrol, whether we were ambushed or just needed to put out some fire, it was guns up, and then we would head up to wherever the action was. And as soon as we got up there and started cranking out rounds, nobody wants to be anywhere near us because we're the heavy firepower. And once you got that firepower going out, everybody out there wants to get rid of us. So we drew a lot of fire. And in the course of that, you know, I kind of make light of it. It's pretty serious business, but there's all kinds of little things about the life expectancy of a machine gunner in combat, anywhere from 7 to 20 seconds. And I, in fact, during my tour, which was cut short by me getting shot, I lost almost 3 crews of my men to being wounded or killed. And so, you know, we were a pretty valuable asset, those guns, but boy, oh boy, oh boy. It get real tough.
On these patrols that you go out on, was there always a certain objective, or were you always dispatched to back up someone else who could fire?
Good question. Real good question. I wouldn't have expected you to answer that, but it's a smart question, because at that time, our objective was try to get them to stop and fight, because we only ever saw very small units, maybe 2, 3, 10, 15 at the very most of the BC. And they would fire a few rounds, and then because we had fire superiority, we could crank out a lot of rounds real fast. And, you know, Marines are trained marksmen. Every Marine, whether you're in the air wing or a cook or whatever, is a rifleman, and you're trained marksman. We practice that a lot. We're very, very good shots. So when we start cranking out rounds, they leave. So our objective in going out was to get hit. And that sounds pretty stupid, but that's exactly what it was. Go out, make contact, and then radio back your position and try to get support to come in around so we can get them trapped. And, you know, get them to stand up and fight, because we knew in a stand-up fight, nobody's going to beat us. Can't. Impossible. Too much firepower. But, you know, another thing I mentioned earlier was that they usually knew where we were going. They usually would make it a point to not be there when we got there. And we were always under observation. And we never went anywhere, whether it was you're in your own compound, whether you're in the bush, whether you're in the Chulai sands, that somebody wasn't watching you.
From their side.
From their side. That's why. That leads me to another thing. When we would do these ambushes and patrols, at night, we didn't come back in. We stayed where we were. When I was in the bush, I never saw a building bigger than a little one-room hooch in 3 months. We never got out of the bush. We were supplied there. You know, the helicopters come and drop water and ammunition and food. We just stayed there. But anyway, we were always under observation. So when we get to a certain area, whether we were doing patrols or an ambush, we always stopped for the night before it was dark, because we knew we were being watched, and we wanted them to know where we were. And then after dark, maybe 9, 10 o'clock, a couple hours after dark, we would move.
So all the movements at night.
Yeah, we would move to a different location, maybe 25 yards away, 30, 40 yards away, but where we could see where we were. And then we learned this the hard way too, because they would have all of our positions plotted before it ever got dark. They knew exactly where the machine guns were, which were their main targets, where every fighting hole was. So after dark, we would move. We'd set up and try to do it as quietly as we possibly could. A lot of times we'd leave everything there, our food and canteens, and just take our rifles and ammunition so that we'd make as little noise as possible and move on. And then when you start hearing noises back where we were, then we'd throw flares. Or we had these little things you'd hit on a rock and they would shoot a flare up and, would light things up, and then we would light them up.
So you wouldn't be afraid to fight
We
at
would
night?
ambush them then,
Yeah.
where they were trying to get us. So we learned the hard way. That's how you dealt with that.
Can you recall after or what? I'm sorry, the Chulang Valley, did you say?
The what?
Chulang Peninsula?
Oh, Chulai.
Chulai.
Yeah, on the sand.
Can you recall where you moved after that? Or where your next movement was to?
Not exactly. I mean, it just, with us, if something came up, if we're out on Chulai, and they said, okay, there's a unit of the 9th Marines being hit over here 20 miles away, the next thing we knew, we got a flight of helicopters in. And everybody gets on a helicopter, and off you go. So we never knew exactly where you were going at any particular operation. It was just get in there, and you learned where you were afterwards, maybe, if you were lucky. So it wasn't a matter of saying, okay, I did operations around Da Nang, I did operations in Chulai, which was a huge area. I did operations in the Haishaw Valley, Marble Mountain, Monkey Mountain, aptly named because it's crawling with monkeys. But these are all just, I wish I could paint the right picture for you what these places look like, because it was just narrow ravines of rocky ledges and bamboo growing everywhere, and just in places almost impenetrable. You've heard of a triple canopy jungle. Some of the area was that. They got big trees and then smaller trees, and then the growth on the bottom where the sunlight doesn't even get in. And so that's the kind of area we worked. Crossing rivers, monsoons. And, we were there one time during a big, it wasn't a monsoon, it was, what do they call them down there, typhoon? Yeah, I think that's what it was, a typhoon came ashore. And I think this is when we were just near Chulai, because it was low ground. A lot of Vietnam was low ground. But anyway, the typhoon came in so fast. We were in positions at the edge of a big jungle area, and I think we'd been there for a couple of days because they'd been warning us that this thing was coming, a big typhoon, which is a hurricane. And over the course of maybe 12, 14 hours, we had that much rain, maybe 12, 15, 20 inches of rain. You can't imagine how hard it can rain. But it was just, if you looked up, you would drown. And I had my machine gun set up and sandbagged in on tripods, which we never carried into combat. Tripods of 15 pounds of dead weight. We usually fired from the hip or from bipods. But anyway, it was set up on tripods, and the water came up so fast that my gun was submerged. We couldn't find the gun for a bit.
That was funny.
The water, we thought we were going to drown. The water came up to almost waist deep.
Oh, wow.
And as far as you could see, it was water. And the gun is down there. So we had to go feeling around trying to find out where the machine gun was again. And, that lasted for maybe 24 hours before the water finally went down. And, of course, all of our gear was gone. It had washed away. We were just lucky to salvage our canteens and personal equipment, ammo and rifles. So we had to be completely resupplied again after that.
Can you recall any major battles that you participated in?
Well, most of what we did was hit and run. It never took more than 10, 15 minutes, tops. But the only big one I can recall is Operation Harvest Moon, which would have been It started on December 9th, 1965. And I remember that because we have never taken so many casualties, so many dead and wounded at one time. Well, our company, which at that time was Lima Company, L Company, 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, we were the point element for a battalion or regimental size operation. How we got to be point, I don't know, but that's not a good place to be. But anyway, we were, and we were set up in a series of V's. Then we were moving across these rice paddies so that we were covering our flanks, and we're trying to cover the rear and the front, but you don't want to give the bad guys out in front of you a clear target, so we don't just all go on line.
Right.
And we did a series of V's, and everybody's spaced a good 5 to 10 yards apart. So it looks like a very huge assembly of men, and in fact it really is. But we're all set far apart, so on one hand you got a bunch of guys around you, on the other hand, there's nobody for 30 feet on either side of you. Right. So you kind of feel a little all alone in a situation like that. But Harvest Moon was a biggie. It's in a lot of histories of the Vietnam War. And we were moving across this big rice paddy, and I saw, there were ditches or ravines on the left, I can remember that, and we could see a tree line over here in front of us, a line of jungle, and I saw a little hooch over there, and pretty calm. And on my right, what I know now, it was Hill 43. When I say 43, it's 43 meters. There were no other hills. It was just there. It was like a big dumb rock sitting out there. But it was a huge hill, 43 meters high by, I don't know, but it was how wide it was, but maybe covered 50 acres, 80 acres, something like that, loaded with rocks and so on. So we started to take a little bit of sniper fire from the flanks, which is no big deal because we always get that. And we hadn't taken any casualties for quite some time as we were moving through these rice paddies. But then the volume of fire started to increase. We just passed through this little village, was set up on the side of the rice paddies, and it had maybe 20 or 25 hooches, buildings. But the odd thing about it was there were no people. You could see where there were ducks and their chickens and their pigs were running around. And, there was food on tables, and there was corn and all that. So we knew they're not here for a reason. They know something we don't know. They always knew something we don't know. And it's kind of like Iraq today. Our troops moved through there, and you got all kinds of people milling around and, smiling for the cameras and that kind of thing. And then the next scene, there are no people there. That means one thing: you better be getting low and doing it in a hurry, because they know what's going to happen. Okay, I digress. But there's similarities. Anybody who can't see the parallels between what we're doing over there today and what happened 50 years ago, they don't want to know. Okay, now you already know my political affiliation. Okay, anyway, we're moving across this rice paddy, and the fire is increasing, and so we thought, okay, something's coming down here. And it was just like somebody flipped a switch. We went from maybe 10, 15 rounds a minute that we were coming in to all of a sudden the place looked like it was hailing, the bullets hitting in the rice paddies and so on. Well, we hit the ground rather fast. The patties were full of water at that time, so I don't know what time of the year that would have made it. Well, I do, it was December. So that's their planting season. And so the series of dikes go around all these rice paddies. So we set up our guns and took our defensive positions right along these rice paddy dikes. And something that was really odd about these things that we didn't discover until afterwards, periodically along these dikes, and these, the normal rice paddy dikes about this wide, but these dikes were maybe 4 feet, which seemed kind of odd, but what do we know? And every so often there were little mounds on top of these dikes that maybe were maybe 3-4 feet high, and about as round as this table right here, maybe 4 or 5 foot in diameter. And what we didn't know until later is that there were tunnels dug down in the sides of the rice paddy dikes, which would come up inside those little mounds. They're just like what do they call those? Ants, like an anthill. And then they had the VC were in there. It would be a one-man position, and there would be a little firing slit, and we saw them later. They were just very tiny things, just big enough to stick the barrel of an AK or an SKS out and shoot at you. Well, apparently the guys who sprung the ambush and from the front sprung it a little too quick, because when we took our defensive positions, we were on the wrong side of these for them to shoot at us. The little fellas inside these little mounds, and there must have been dozens of them, couldn't shoot at us. And their buddies over in the tree line a couple 100 meters away were shooting, and they were shooting in their own little mounds. So they were in a kind of a bad way right there. But we never again realized that until afterwards. But the fighting was very, very fierce at that point. We were putting out rounds as fast as we could. Very hard to see targets because of the smoke. But every so often you'd see one of the enemy go zipping across and try to take them down. But because of the fact that we were getting so much fire over such a large area, the flanks all of a sudden erupted. They had us in a horseshoe, really. So once this opened up on the front, the fire just started all the way around us. And from this hill on my right side, Hill 43, they were up there like fleas on a dog and firing down on us. So they got the high ground.
Could you see a lot of them, or were most of them like in the woods?
Very, very, very difficult to see because they were really good at camouflage. You never see pictures of the North Vietnamese or Viet Cong where they wouldn't have camouflage all over their bodies, branches and so on. And that's the bright side. And yet they had some pretty screwy guys too. Because we'd be in the jungle and all of a sudden you'd see, the conical hats that they wore, they look like little pyramids on their heads. They're white, about so big around. It's to keep the sun and the rain off. It's their own little house away from home, you might say. But you'd be walking along and, keeping your eyes busy looking for trouble, and all of a sudden you'd spot these little hats bouncing through the brush. You can't see them, but you can see these little white hats. And so then you'd, more often than not, you could spot a rifle or something like that somebody was carrying, then we'd just light them up. But, you would think, take the damn hat off. How smart is that?
Couldn't see them, you don't think you see them?
But, okay, so they did silly things just like we did from time to time. So anyway, back to Harvest Moon, in that particular battle, we lost 12 killed and 54 wounded out of a company of roughly 200 men. So that's very, very heavy casualties. And at one point, all of our corpsmen were down. All of them. We had 3 corpsmen assigned up there where I was, toward the front, and all 3 of them were killed. They were all killed helping, other wounded Marines. And these are Navy guys. These are Navy corpsmen. They're not Marines, they're Navy corpsmen. So at one point during this, it was getting pretty bad. We had a lot of wounded there, and we had run out of bandages and that kind of thing. And so I went back looking for another corpsman. I knew there had to be somebody back there because they set up an aid station back in that little village that we had just gone through at the start. And that's where they were collecting all the wounded, hopefully to get them evacuated at some point. And I'm going along this dike, and I could see a couple of guys in the water down here, laying in the water, and all you could see was his nose, his nose and his mouth sticking out of the water. The rest of it was totally submerged. And here was our company first sergeant and the company executive officer, which was the first lieutenant, and down there. And as I started yelling at them, they couldn't hear much of what I was saying. One, because there was a lot of shooting going on, but 2, their ears were underwater. So I started yelling at them, we need a corpsman, we need a corpsman. One of them stuck his head up. I don't know which one to get the hell out of here. He says, "You're drawing fire."
Were they just hiding?
Oh yeah, they were just trying to stay low.
Guys that are supposed to be...
Well, these guys are armed with nothing but pistols. They're supposed to be coordinating the fighting and putting guys where they need to be in order to get the job done. But at that point, they were just trying to save their own necks, which, afterwards we kind of laughed about it. But the first lieutenant, a little later on, well, first off, we found out there were no corpsmen left except the one that was taking care of the wounded and the dying in the village. But that lieutenant later on, when evacuating wounded up by where we were, took a bullet through the hand, and as a result, he was a Silver Star winner in that particular battle. So, anyway, when I couldn't get a corpsman, I went back to my gun, and they're still putting out a lot of fire. And somebody had called in. Were you still okay?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I was just checking the tape. We're still good.
Somebody had called in for a medevac helicopter, and I didn't know it at the time, but this helicopter came right over our heads, and apparently at some point, I didn't realize, I didn't even hear it, that the pilot was shot, and the helicopter came down like a rock, and it crashed in just a few meters from us. I don't know, the rotor blades are around 50, 60 feet long, and one of the rotor blades hit the ground right by the foot of one of our ammo carriers for the gun, for the machine gun. So I mean, it was that close, a matter of 15 yards maybe. And the engine was just screaming and glowing cherry red on that thing. And we saw the crew chief got out, and I think I saw the co-pilot get out and a gunner get out. And everybody started yelling, "Hey, we got to get out of here because that thing's going to blow." And it also, not only, it was a medevac helicopter, but it was actually a gunship. He was coming in to take off our wounded, but he was a gunship, and he's loaded with rockets, and 2.75 rockets. And so everybody started hollering, "Hey, get out of here, get out of here. That thing is going to blow." So we packed up the gun, and we were just going to move out of the way. And as I'm passing by this chopper, I could see that there was still somebody slumped in the the pilot's seat. And I didn't do this the first time. I'm starting to remember two things. Excuse me.
Oh, no problem.
And there was somebody else, a little guy with me. I'm a pretty big guy. And the other fellow was smaller. And so as we're passing by, we can see this guy there, the pilot. And so I said, we can't leave him here. We gotta go get him out of there. And I don't think anybody else really understood that there was somebody still in the chopper. It was just, we happened to be going by the main sliding doors that were open. And so we went over there, and I cut the belt that was holding him in, part of his harness, to get him in. And then I could see he was alive because he was moving. And so I started to pull him, or we started to pull him. And he looked at me, and I said, "Sir, this is going to hurt." He was a major. And I said, "This is going to be painful." And he looked at me, he says, "Son, you do what you got to do." He's a Marine pilot. So we dragged him out. I was the only one who had any chance of carrying him through the rice paddies. So we got him on my back, and I knew he was hurt. I didn't know how bad he was hurt. And so I started back, and the bullets are flying. I'm scared, absolutely out of my mind. At one point, I can remember my helmet coming off, and I still got my rifle, because I was the team leader of guns at that time, so I was carrying an automatic rifle. And to this day, I don't know, but I think he got hit again while he was on my back, while I was carrying him. Got him in a fireman's carry, but you couldn't move fast because, like I said, the rice paddy water is maybe 6 inches deep, but then there's 10 inches of mud under that. So he keeps sinking in, and you got to pull 1 foot out at a time. But the other part of the company, most of the company by that time, it had made it back to the edge of that village where there was a more secure, defensible position, dike, if you will, that they were behind. I could hear everybody yelling. That was maybe 50, 60 yards away. And so we're moving in that direction, and I'm yelling at them, "I need some help, I need some help." And when I got to within maybe 20 feet or so, a couple of guys ran out and they took him off my back, and we were able to get in behind the dikes, rice paddy dikes, and the fire actually was slowing down. And I can remember there wasn't so many rounds being popped, but after that helicopter went down, there was initially when they saw a lot of us trying to make it back, get away from the thing, but at that point then it started to slow down. And so we got set in, and I remember I was just about dead on my feet. Somebody, it was either the company gunny sergeant or the platoon commander, somebody said, "Son, you're going to get a cite." No, he knew my name, so he said, "Dudeck," he said, "you're going to get a citation for this," or something like that. And nothing really ever came of that because, well, one, the pilot died. Somebody came and told me within a couple of hours that he never made it, that he didn't get evac in time, and so he died. And then two, I got shot just a few weeks later, so I was gone. And so that's the end. I did inquire about it years later, but there was no record of anything like that. They don't mean a thing anyway, but with a Bronze Star and $4, you can get a cup of Starbucks coffee. That's about what it amounts to. So that was Harvest Moon. And then after we got done with that, that particular phase of that battle, we had to go take that hill on the right side. So now we're approaching dark. And the whole scenario of the battle, I think it started at around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Like I say, most of them are 15 minutes or so, 10 minutes, 10 seconds. And this one was running hours. And so we had already had a lot of casualties, and they were stacking up big, and we were still taking heat from that hill. So we did our good old Marine Corps thing, get online and charge the hill. And we chased the VC off of that hill, and we took control of it, and we brought all of our people up there. And it was big enough to handle the whole company, so it was a pretty big hill. And my understanding as of at the end of that for us was pretty much the end of it, because we had to be evacuated out of there the next day, and, to be refit. We needed more men, we needed more equipment, we needed ammunition, and so on. But I do remember the following morning, we're set in on this hill. We're thinking we're going to get hit all night long, that they're going to come up this hill after us, so we were ready. And at dawn, just as it started to get a little hazy light, you can see people out there in the rice paddies where we had spent the previous afternoon in the battle. They're out there picking up ammunition and grenades and stuff. They didn't do that very long. And we kind of closed out that battle with those guys. So, like they did stupid things too. You don't get caught in broad daylight picking up the other guys' guns and ammo. So they did. So that ended that particular battle. And I thought, as I recall, they said we were involved with about roughly 600 North Vietnamese and VC in that battle, and we killed something over 200. And we took 12 killed and 54 wounded.
So you're done with Harvest Moon. Take us to where, eventually up to the point where you got
where I got shot?
hit.
Okay. Well, luckily before that I got to go on R&R to Okinawa. You're supposed to be able to go once during your tour, not to Okinawa. That's probably the dead end of all places to go on R&R. But it's kind of an understanding that whoever got out of country for a little while would bring little gifts back to the rest of the guys in the squad. So I went on R&R to Okinawa, and I think I had about $500 in my pocket. And I went on Christmas Eve.
Oh, God.
The worst possible time to get Christmas Eve. Not much going on. But anyway, I do remember I bought quite a lot of liquor to bring back, because it was real hard to get refreshment in the bush. The rules said that you're supposed to be allowed 2 sodas or 2 beers a day only. We would see that once in maybe a month and a half, where you get something like that. But anyway, I brought back some refreshment for the boys on the line, and I got back before New Year's Eve, and when I got off the plane, I felt like I could hardly walk, because everything was clinking and clanking so much. I had a sea bag full of booze that I brought back, and so long about I was saving it for a special occasion. Everybody knew I had it, but they were being really, really nice to me. So I think I even got out of a couple of ambushes and patrols just because they knew.
Did you have that?
I had that. And anyway, it came New Year's Eve, and New Year's Eve is a pretty special thing in Vietnam. It's like 4th of July, New Year's Eve, Christmas, and everything else rolled into one. And the Vietnamese make a big deal of it. And they just, if they didn't have a war going on, you wouldn't have known it because all of the stuff that they had flying up in the air on New Year's Eve. So I recall we're sitting out, I had pulled out my stash, and I'm sitting up on the top of my bunker, and I had passed out bottles of Seagrams and stuff to my buddies, and we're all sitting there just kind of watching all of the flares and the I think the VC were shooting up in the air, and the Vietnamese army, and so everybody was shooting up in the air, making a lot of noise and having a good time. And then all of a sudden I heard something behind me, and I looked, oh, there's my platoon commander, second lieutenant. Usually not a good thing, but I had planned for this too. I had a bottle of Seagrams right down here. I just picked it up and went like that. It disappeared from my hand. You know, like, he's gone. So that's one of the funny things. We had a lot of funny things. It wasn't supposed to be funny, but it did turn out to be that way. I got to tell you about this rubber boat. I mentioned this rubber boat raid we were going to do. Big, slick operation we were supposed to be on, and attack this village several miles down the river, which was supposed to be a VC hotbed. So we were going to do a rubber boat assault. So they choppered in a company of Marines on the backside of that several miles away, and they were going to come this way and be a blocking force. And then we're going to get on these rubber boats very silently and sneak down the river, get out of the boats and attack this village and chase all the VC into this blocking force and annihilate the whole enemy and march on to Hanoi and raise a flag or something. But not quite the way it happened. We got the blocking force in position, and we're down at the river after dark, well after dark, this all taking place at night, and no rubber boats. So we waited, and word came down that they're trucking them in from somewhere, Dudeck or wherever we happened to be close to. But we waited for hours, and no boats showed up. Finally, these trucks come lumbering in. And I don't know who got the message wrong, but they didn't have rubber boats. They brought us 16 or 18-foot aluminum boats that we're supposed to quietly get on, about 10 Marines to a boat, and then paddle, no motors or anything. I hadn't made too much sense of the boat, so that we're paddling with oars, banging the sides of these boats, all of our equipment banging and rattling around in there. Well, there wasn't a VC within 10 miles that didn't know we were coming. And we were just very fortunate we didn't get ambushed along the way, because that could have happened any of a dozen different times. Anyway, we got down to this little hill, and we all made a big show of jumping out of the boats and screaming, yelling, running at the village. There wasn't a soul there. They even had time to pack up their chickens and get out of Dodge. So that was, I think we did find a pig, and we were a little piglet, and we were going to have a little cookout there with that piglet. Actually we did. And we started to cook the doggone thing, butchered it, and we were going to cook it. Had a fire going, and just as we were getting to the point where, it looked like you might be able to pick little pieces off, and a sniper started shooting at us. What a mean devil. We haven't seen anything but sea rations in weeks. And so we got this, and everybody was really looking forward to that. But anyway, so we had to leave the pig, and they did terrible things to it, right, to make sure the VC didn't come in and eat it. So, but okay, you want to know the time I got hit. We were on this little Uh, it's not really a hill, but it was a little higher ground than the swamps around us. I think this was down in the Ashaw Valley, which is a really, really, really bad place. I guess it got a lot worse in the late 60s and early 70s when the North Vietnamese came in real force, but there were a lot of VC and a few North Vietnamese there at that time. But it was a really bad place because there are a lot of tunnels, there's a lot of jungle, a lot of mountains, swamps, everything. All the worst kind of country you could think of. And we were on this, set in this little high ground, kind of set aside from the mountains. In some of the pictures I've got, you can see the mountains in the background. They look like they're a terribly long ways away, but they're really not. We would chopper into those mountains all the time, or even sometimes walk to them. But anyway, we're doing this, we're running ambushes and patrols off this high ground. And we got our little hooches set up there. I guess we'd been there before. We had relieved another company there. And we were going to be there a week. Or maybe a little longer, I don't remember exactly. So we, like I said, everybody, the VC, everybody, every bad guy in the country knew what we were going to do before we ever did it. Because they had the inside track. Our so-called allies, about half of them were VC too, so the Vietnamese army wasn't much to really get excited about in terms of protecting you. So, but anyway, they knew what we were doing. So we would run these patrols, we'd run these ambushes, and we'd try to get real cute. And, we'd say we're going somewhere, and tell our guys on the hill that we were actually going somewhere else. So we tried to trick them into not knowing exactly where we went, but they always had the general idea. So in this one particular patrol, and I think that one picture I got with a group, it showed that's when we were getting ready to go out. Yeah, that one right there. That's when we're getting ready. And it just shows this is a heavy weapons platoon. And a lot of these guys are dead or wounded. This is our corpsman right in front here. And he was killed. This guy back here, Roberts, was killed. This guy, Nelson Eddie Wilson, was killed. This is my gunner. He was very seriously wounded. This is the other gun leader. I was a gun leader at that time. He was hurt. He was hit at the same time I was. But, yeah, we look at pictures of him. Sorry. Tell you more about it. But anyway, we started out of the wire, and this is the daylight patrol. And that's where we were getting ready to go, right there. And we moved down into the low ground, which was maybe, couldn't have been more than a couple hundred meters away, 300-400 meters possibly. And we started moving along this river. The river was on our right. And as we started getting into thicker jungle, the drums started. They're very antiquated people. They didn't have a lot of sophisticated equipment, but they told stories with drums. And these fellas told the story of a bunch of Marines coming their way. And so the drums would follow us pretty much parallel, and you couldn't tell where they were coming from because in the jungle, sound is really, gets all screwed up. And so we couldn't tell exactly where the drums were coming from, but we knew it did not tell good things. And I don't recall exactly how far we were supposed to go out. It couldn't have been more than maybe 1,000 or 2,000 meters, which would be 1 or 2 kilometers. We reached a point where, again, we were following a trail, but not on the trail, kind of off to the side. The ground rose on the left, and they got the river on the right, and there were some big rocks along the way, and it was kind of what we call a choke point, where we had to, in order to continue the patrol, we had to get beyond this choke point, very narrow area, and right at about the narrowest point was a clearing, a small clearing, maybe 5 yards across, maybe a little bit more. But it was just, having been there for a while, it was just a perfect ambush point. Somebody stupid enough to be there. So the river's probably about 30 yards wide. So we had to get from this side to that side in order to continue the patrol. Going up the side of the cliff at that point wasn't an option because he would be just like in the shooting gallery. So I set up my machine gun on this side, and we started sending people across one at a time, sprinting. Sent the other gun across, and Dave Baggett, the tow-headed guy in the pictures, his gun was the one that was sent across. And they set up on the other side, the guy in back sitting there with the blonde hair. And he set up his gun to cover the rest of us coming across. So I stood up, and I'm looking across the river, and I just caught the faintest glimpse of a silhouette of something that just didn't look right, didn't look like it should be there. One of them conical hats or maybe a head or something, but it just said, that's a person. And just like that, crack. And I was down. And the guy had opened up with an automatic rifle, 30 caliber carbine. Not a real good weapon. And, not very powerful, but it was powerful enough to put me down because he put a bullet through my elbow here, went in this side and came out the back side here. And another bullet through my shirt, but that one didn't even break skin. So, everything just went into slow motion. You hear about that, but it's like a car wreck. I can remember when my daughter was in a car wreck, we were driving right behind her, and I was kind of snoozing. My wife was driving, and she yelled, and I looked up, and I could just in slow motion see their pickup truck turn. That was just like this, and then it hit the ground. But I could see my watch flying through the air. It was on my left wrist, and I could just see it glinting away, and my rifle had fallen right there, and I had a fully automatic M14 20-round mag. And I hit the ground, and I knew what had happened. It didn't feel like you'd imagine a bullet, but it was like somebody just smacked you with a baseball bat. And I knew what it was. And I had my rifle, my hand was on that, so I fell down kind of behind a rock, and I just laid it up on top, and I don't even know if I really intended to do this or not, but I touched the trigger. And luckily it was aimed in the right direction, because the first round or two went that way, and then the rest of them went up, right up over my head. And then my rifle went flying, because I couldn't control it. And the gun that I had set in, the gunner immediately opened up, and it was just like a reflex. When I'm talking about this, what I've just explained to you took place in maybe 2 seconds. He opened up, got about 5, 6 rounds, 8 rounds out, and a piece on the gun. These are guns that came all the way from boot camp with us 2.5 years, 3 years ago. And they were old then, so the Marine Corps always got whatever the Army didn't want. They probably didn't want these guns, but anyway. The buffer blew up, which is it's a shock absorber, and it pushes the I can't think of it. I used to know the parts of that thing like the back of my hand, but I can't remember. But anyway, it's a shock absorber and allows the gun to fire. Well, when that spring in there busted and blew up, then the gun is useless. So I heard my gunner hollering over across the clearing to Dave, who was on the other side with his gun, said, my gun just blew and I'm out of action. Well, about that time, Dave's gun only got a couple rounds out and it malfunctioned. I don't remember exactly what happened to his, but he said his was out for the count. It couldn't be fixed. But he said he was going to bring the buffer to his gun over to mine so that we could just replace the buffer. It only took a few seconds to do that, and then mine would be back in action again. So as he grabbed it, and he started to run across the clearing, and he took a round through the thigh, shattered his femur, the thigh bone. And so he was down right in that clearing, and he threw the buffer over. I guess it was just a reflexes and going down from what Bill tells me. But they were able then to get my gun back in action. When I say before that, this is our firepower. When that thing started cranking off rounds, those fellas figured they better get out of Dodge. And so the firing really slacked down, and we were able to get Dave out. And our corpsman was working on him because he was very badly injured. They're probably one of the worst types of wounds you could ever imagine, because when that thigh bone shatters, the biggest muscle in your body is right here. And once the tension is taken off of that by having a piece of bone shot out, everything goes like that. Just the muscles tighten up. And so he was in an awful lot of pain. So I can remember holding my arm, and I didn't tell you this the other day, but when I first grabbed it, I got picked by something, and so I picked it up. I thought it was a stick, it was a chunk of bone. It took out of my arm, and I thought, oh dear, this isn't good. And I threw that away. And I could walk, and they called in 81 millimeter mortars to help control the fire from the other side of the river. That's a pretty good sized shell. Like that weighs about 8-9 pounds. And once those things started landing, it's a very high trajectory. It was firing from a couple miles away. Not the base that we had left, but a base beyond, a real fire base. So once those things started to land on the other side of the river, the VC, everything was done, and they decided to DD-mow and get out of Dodge. And they called in a medevac chopper for us, for Dave and I, and I wasn't, I could still walk, and then by that time I'd had a pretty good dose of morphine, so I walked with a grin. Because I knew I was out of it. I'm going home. And Dave was pretty much in the same picture. He was hurting like the devil, but he said, dude, and he called me dude. He said, we're done, we're going home. And so they carried him to the chopper, and I walked, and I kind of flipped myself on my back into the chopper. And it was only about 40, 50 yards away. And so I got in there, and they brought Dave in. They set him over on the side closer to where the pilots were. And I didn't know it, but there was a film crew on board. They were doing a documentary on how quick casualties are taken from the field to the field hospital. Charlie Med, they call it. And so there was a doctor on board, which we never had. Usually it was just a corpsman and the pilots, or even sometimes you didn't even get a corpsman. They just threw you on the bird and flew you out. But it was a matter of just a very few minutes before we were to a field hospital, and the doctor, seeing that Dave was much more badly injured than I was, choppers are kind of unstable, a little shaky, and these old birds that we had were probably not the best at that time. but he's tried to step across me to get to Dave, and he stepped right smack on my elbow. That got my attention. And the guy apologized. He said, "Oh man," he said, I can't believe I just did that," or, something like that. He said, "I'm so sorry," but I said, "No problem. Give me another shot of that juice." That's good stuff. But so they got back to the hospital, or actually Charlie Med, where they did surgery, and they debrided the wound, what they call it. That's where they removed the dead tissue and bone fragments and that stuff, clean it out as best they can, get the dirt, that kind of thing. And they were talking about having to possibly take the arm off because of nerve damage, and that it would just, wouldn't be of any use. And that was the second thing in that few minutes that got my attention. And I said, "Please don't, is there anything, do you have to make that decision now?" And so the doc, he put his hand, he grabbed my hand, he says, "Here, I want you to feel this." He said, we're gonna let it go." But he took my finger and he placed it right on the entry hole. And he said, right down there, which would be, if you're with your finger on the entry hole, he said, "There's a major artery on this side. There's a major artery on this side." That bullet went right exactly through the V of those two arteries without ever damaging either one of them. So he said, if that had not been the case, he said, you would have either died before we could have done much for you, or the arm would have had to come off. So as he said, as it was, he said, "Well, it's probably a lot of damage, and you may not ever be able to use it again," because at that point I had no function of the hand or finger or anything like that, and didn't for a couple months later, until after I'd been in traction and things started to grow back together. But as you can see, it still works. There's a lot of stuff I can't do, but there's a lot more I can do. So I'll never play a piano. Of course, I couldn't play a piano before anyway.
So if you got injured, you eventually got out of Vietnam.
Yeah,
Where'd
well,
you go
that
when
was
you got back?
it was kind of funny because they did surgery. I call it surgery. I don't know if it's really surgery. They just clean things up. But he got off the operating table. He says, "Hey, now go down there, walk down there between those two buildings over there, and go find yourself a bunk." And so, I mean, you don't do that today in a hospital. So get off the operating table and go find yourself someplace to rest. But then it was, I think 2 days later, I had more things crawling around in my body at that point than you can imagine. I had an infection as a result of the wound, and so I went kind of delirious after a day or so. And I had touch of malaria, touch of yellow fever, I had hookworms, I had little parasites that even God doesn't know the name of. But so things kind of went out of whack there for a while. I don't remember a lot until I got back to California. Not California. Yeah, they flew us into San Francisco. And the next thing I remember is waking up in this hospital ward, and I'm still in all my grimy jungle. I had blood all over, and hadn't shaved. I was filthy. And I'm laying there, and this first sergeant comes walking in. I don't know what time of day or night it was, but he said, "Hey, wake up, Marines." He said, "I got something to tell you." He says, "Don't worry about anything. We're going to take good care of you, and we're going to get you right back in the ward just as quick as you can." Well, things started flying. Somebody threw boots at him. And then a doctor was right behind him, and then people were yelling, "You're hurting and smelling bad." And so the doctor came by and grabbed him and yanked him right out of there. And then I kind of went night-night again until I got to Great Lakes Naval Hospital. And that's pretty much next thing I remember, because things really go haywire with infections and that kind of thing. But the only thing I remembered real vividly was that, hey, it's still here. I was in a half cast and I had to stay in traction for several months. And they said that it's really odd, it hadn't happened before, but the bone really, there must have been bone fragments that were still alive that had not been taken out, and they began to grow again. So they actually grew back together. So the arm was working pretty good again. So I was there in the hospital for almost a year with therapy and that kind of thing. And then they sent me off to Muskegon from Great Lakes Naval Hospital. I was bored being there. I didn't want to stay there anymore. And I knew I couldn't go back to active duty because they'd already told me that, because I could never pass the physicals anymore, the tests. So they sent me to teach Boy Scouts up at Muskegon at the Owaspee Scout Reservation out of Chute. Now it turns out these are all inner city kids from Chicago. And I don't know whether I caused more damage by teaching these guys to shoot. They'd have just let us go. But at any rate, we did that, and that's where I met my wife. She was boiling hamburgers in the snack bar out there. They had them in big 5-gallon buckets. They put hamburgers in a liquid, and then they boiled them to eat them. So she still tries to boil hamburgers. I won't let her do that. But anyway, that's where we met. I went up there with a friend of mine I met at the hospital, Bob Dart. He was a sergeant, I was a corporal, and he had a brand new Chevy convertible. And so he dated her first. And then her mother liked me best. He had been shot through the mouth, so his whole face was wired together, and he had kind of looked like a chain link fence. So her mother liked me best, and so I got her. And we've been married 40 years as of April 29th. So that's a long time ago. So I think that about took you through Vietnam. Unless there's anything else you want.
Just what? But after the Boy Scout camp, what?
Well, that was just a matter of time. They sent me home to await discharge. There was really nothing more I could do. I was actually thinking about a military career in the Marine Corps until I got shot, but that kind of ended that, and it was probably a good thing. Mary was going to school at Western, and she was pretty close to graduation. I think maybe a junior, something like that. And so when we decided we were going to get married, this sounds kind of hokey, but when I was up at the Boy Scout camp, when she and I started dating, it was only a matter of a couple of dates, and I told her we're going to get married. And we knew we were engaged in 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Can you believe that?
Are you serious?
2 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
But then we didn't marry for another year. So, still hanging in there. And then, I waited discharge, and I worked for a while in the post office in Grand Rapids. No, not in Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo. Because she was going to school there, so I had to get a job there. And what else did we do? Oh, yeah, she's the one who talked me into going to school. She was only 18 or 19 at the time, but wise beyond her years. Because she's saying, I've got an education, or she's got an education, she's going to be a teacher, and she said it would, be really critical for me to have some kind of an education too, if we're really going to be equals. And she said, I don't want you thinking someday I've got more education than you, or whatever. So she talked me into going to college. And I thought, oh God, the last thing in the world this old boy is going to do is go to college. I mean, I haven't graduated with a tremendous C-minus average out of high school. Or it might have been a D plus, I don't know. But friends of her family, and one friend in particular named Mary Hartman, was an English teacher at Muskegon Community College. And so my wife Mary and Mary Hartman got together and they said, Louis, let's sit down and have a talk. And so we talked. And she said, you know, you're not a dummy. You speak well. You seem to have, you read well. She said, I think you ought to try college just to see what it's like. Well, I applied at Western and they turned me down out of hand. Took one look at my resume and said, okay, you want to do what? So, but anyway, the VA paid for everything. They sent me to community college, and Mary Hartman worked with me, and she taught me to write. She taught me to take notes. She taught me all the things that I never did in high school. Was study. How to study. You don't think about that. If you don't know how to study, you can't make it. And so she taught me those things. And in a year and a half at JC, once I found out I could get through one semester, or yeah, I guess it was semester, and I passed all my classes. Well, I didn't have to, I only had 2 or 3 classes at that time, and I figured out that I could do it. And she was my cheerleader. And I started taking a full load, and then I started going year round. And I left JC and applied to Western, and based on the grades at JC, they accepted me. And I never had any trouble in college after that. I mean, I just went year round. I think I finished in 3 years, the whole works. In 3 years, and I had 11 hours toward my master's when I finished. When I left, got my BA. And, I was no whiz kid, but I got by with B's and that kind of thing. A few A's every now and then. Never failed a course. So that was it. And then I went on interviews with my wife, and she was looking for a teaching job, and I had now been accepted at Western. And she got a job in Vicksburg, teaching first grade, I believe. And I went on the interview with her, and we interviewed with her superintendent. And the guy said, well, no, you come on in too. You don't have to sit out here. Come on in with your wife. We'll all talk. And so we chatted for a little while. He interviewed her and hired her on the spot. And then he said, I'm going to do this. He said, but only with the understanding that as soon as you get your degree, you come back and work for me. Well, at the time, when I did finally graduate, I went back and there were no jobs anymore in teaching. So I did wind up getting a job in Plainwell, teaching job where I taught 4th, 5th, and 6th grades all at the same time. And I did that for 2 years, and then I got recruited by another fellow Marine buddy of mine to go into administration. I've been a principal ever since. So, 31 years.
Wow. Good.
And now I'm retired, and life is.
Thank you very much.
And I'm going fishing early Sunday morning.
That's life. Alright. Thank you very much for this interview.
Hey, no problem.
Funny story.
I hope it's what you want.
The following oral military history project is a series of documentaries in association with the Lowell area men and women who proudly served and sacrificed part of their lives to preserve the opportunities for all of us to build our businesses and raise our families under a blanket of freedom. For reservations and more information, contact the Lowell Area Historical Museum at 616-897-7688.